They weren't rebels. They weren't bitter. They were elders, loyal, respected, and trusted with secrets no ordinary member would ever hear. 4 years, they sat in confidential meetings, delivered public talks, enforced discipline, and comforted families. But behind closed doors, something didn't feel right. Quiet doubts turned into sleepless nights. And then one day, they couldn't stay silent anymore. These are their stories. Men from Australia, the United States, and Canada. Each from a different congregation, each with a different path out. But they all say the same thing now. It wasn't just doctrine. It was mental control. Not obvious, not loud, but subtle, strategic, layered into every meeting, every magazine, every conversation that seemed innocent on the surface. What you're about to hear isn't speculation. It's a breakdown of 5 powerful techniques used, often unknowingly, to shape how Jehovah's Witnesses think, feel, and behave. For the first time, these former elders pull back the curtain and explain how belief turns into obedience, and how obedience slowly becomes control. But before we explore the tactics, you need to understand who these men were, and what made them so trusted. Jehovah's Witnesses don't have pastors or priests. They have elders. Ordinary men, usually in their 40s, 50s, or 60s, chosen from within the congregation. No theology degrees. No formal training in counseling or doctrine. Just men viewed as spiritually mature, nominated by others, and approved by the branch office. To the outside world, they're volunteers. But inside the congregation, their authority is absolute. Once appointed, an elder enters a different world. He receives private instruction, attends secret meetings, and is granted access to materials no average witness is allowed to read, including the confidential handbook Shepherd the Flock of God. Each copy is numbered. Each elder is warned not to share it with his wife, not to discuss it openly, and not to deviate from its instructions. He becomes both shepherd and judge, counselor and enforcer, shaping the lives of others based on policies written behind closed doors. If you believe this kind of content matters, and if you want more voices like these to be heard, take a second to like this video and subscribe. It helps us reach those who are still inside and still questioning. Information filtering. We were trained to protect the flock by limiting what they could know. Brother Martin served as an elder in a small congregation outside Ontario for over 17 years. He wasn't a harsh man. He led prayers with warmth. He organized field service with enthusiasm. But when someone handed him a printed article questioning one of the watchtower's interpretations, everything changed. It was respectful, he recalls. Just a brother saying, "This scripture doesn't seem to match the magazine." But I froze. I didn't read it. I destroyed it. Not because it was dangerous, but because he had been trained to believe it was. Inside elder meetings, Martin says, there was a quiet understanding. Information outside the organization was not just irrelevant, it was spiritually poisonous. Magazines, books, documentaries, news articles, even academic papers, if they didn't come from jw.org, they weren't to be trusted. Questioning them wasn't just discouraged. It was labeled a threat. We didn't say it out loud, but we all knew, if someone starts reading too much, they're drifting. Elders were instructed to gently redirect curious members back to approved material. And if that didn't work, shepherding visits followed. What shocked Martin after leaving was realizing just how much information had been filtered. Historical details, doctrinal changes, legal controversies, all of it had been either sanitized or completely hidden. I thought I was well informed, he says. But I only knew what they allowed me to know. The rest was behind a wall I didn't even realize existed. The organization didn't need to block websites. They just trained members never to want to look beyond the official ones. This is how control begins, not with force, but with restriction disguised as loyalty. When you're told that curiosity is disloyalty, and that reading too widely is a test of your faith, your mind starts to censor itself. You stop asking, "Is this true?" and start asking, "Should I even be reading this?" And in that silence, the control becomes complete, because now you're policing your own thoughts. Loaded language. We didn't just speak differently. We were trained to think in code. Elder Jonathan served in the American Midwest for over a decade. He was sharp, articulate, and respected on the platform. But one night, during a judicial committee, he had a strange realization. The words he was using weren't really his. They were phrases, pre-approved, pre-programmed. It hit me when I heard myself say, "This brother has become spiritually weak," he recalls. That wasn't my voice. That was watchtower vocabulary. And it came with consequences. Jehovah's Witnesses use language with deep emotional charge. Terms like faithful, worldly, goat, apostate, and the truth aren't just words, they're behavioral signals. Call someone spiritually weak, and you've already told others to avoid them. Say someone is waiting on Jehovah, and you've shut down a doubt before it can form. When members start to question something, they often stop themselves, not with scripture, but with slogans. It's not the time to question. Jehovah will fix it. Stay loyal to the organization. The more you repeat these phrases, the less you think for yourself. Over time, your internal dialogue changes. You don't just believe the organization, you start to speak like it. And when you speak like it, it becomes much harder to challenge it. Jonathan says, "It wasn't until I left that I realized how many of my thoughts were borrowed. I didn't lose my faith. I lost the script they gave me." Loaded language doesn't need chains. It works by wrapping ideas in emotion, so questioning a word feels like questioning your entire identity. Once that link is established, the words do the thinking for you. And the deeper you go, the harder it is to hear your own voice beneath the vocabulary. Fear conditioning. You didn't need bars or chains. The fear was enough. In a coastal congregation near Brisbane, Elder Mark served for 14 years. He was sincere, devoted, and deeply respected. But when his teenage son began missing meetings, Mark felt something deeper than concern. He felt panic. "Not because of my son," he says, "but because of what I thought Jehovah might do to our family. I had been trained to believe that even small signs of weakness could bring judgment." Looking back, Mark sees how fear wasn't just present in the organization. It was woven into everything. Fear of losing God's approval. Fear of being disfellowshipped. Fear of dying at Armageddon. These weren't just abstract ideas. They were mentioned constantly in talks, literature, and conversations. Members were reminded that the end could come at any moment, and only those who stayed loyal to Jehovah's organization would survive. Even small acts of independence, celebrating a birthday, questioning a teaching, skipping a meeting, could be seen as steps toward spiritual death. Mark recalls many elders using fear as a tool without even realizing it. "We thought we were motivating people, but really, we were reinforcing trauma." A sister would cry in private, worried she wasn't doing enough. A young man would confess doubts, then disappear a week later, emotionally crushed. "We never told people you'll be destroyed," Mark adds, but the message was clear and terrifying. The fear was always there, quiet, persistent, spiritualized. It kept people compliant. It kept families silent. It made you stay, even when your heart was already gone. Because in a system where questioning means punishment and leaving means total loss, fear doesn't just control behavior, it controls hope. Conditional love. They called it love. But it had conditions. Elder Thomas served in a quiet congregation in Pennsylvania. He baptized dozens of people, hosted Bible studies in his home, brought meals to elderly members. To many, he was the picture of spiritual stability. But when he stepped down from his position, without drama, without sin, everything changed. "One week, my phone wouldn't stop ringing," he recalls. The next week, it was silent. No more texts. No more visits. I wasn't disfellowshipped, but I wasn't one of them anymore. That's when Thomas realized how affection in the organization was often based on usefulness. New members are showered with warmth, attention, and praise, especially if they progress quickly. But that warmth can vanish the moment someone slows down, asks hard questions, or makes a personal decision the elders disapprove of. "It's not hatred," he says. "It's absence. They just fade you out." Members don't always notice it happening. It's subtle. Someone misses a few meetings, they get a loving reminder. Express hesitation, they're gently warned to avoid independent thinking. Show signs of stepping away, and the social world they once trusted begins to evaporate. They say, "We miss you." But what they mean is, "We miss your obedience." Conditional love is powerful because it disguises itself as community. You don't realize the strings are there until you stop moving, and everything unravels. It teaches you that love must be earned, that belonging requires silence, and that one wrong choice can cost you every relationship you thought was real. Thought-stopping cliches. When a thought became dangerous, we repeated a phrase. Brother Martin, the former elder from Ontario, remembers sitting in the front row during a circuit assembly when the speaker said something that didn't sit right with him. It wasn't heretical, just inconsistent with what had been taught years before. But before Martin could finish the thought, a phrase surfaced in his mind like a reflex: "Wait on Jehovah." Just like that, the discomfort was silenced. "I realized later," he says, "we weren't taught to process doubts. We were taught to suppress them." Jehovah's Witnesses use phrases that act like spiritual duct tape. When a question arises, Jehovah will clarify it in due time. When someone notices a contradiction, we're imperfect men. When teachings change, the light is getting brighter. These statements sound humble, even faithful, but in practice, they shut down deeper thinking. The member learns not to investigate, but to defer, not to examine, but to wait. And over time, the mind stops exploring altogether. Martin now sees that these phrases were never meant to invite dialogue. They were meant to end it. "I used them on others," he admits. "But the real damage was how often I used them on myself." Every time a question tried to rise, a preloaded phrase would crush it. The longer he stayed in the system, the more automatic it became. That's the power of thought stopping. You no longer need someone watching you. The control is internal. You silence yourself. Not because you're forbidden to think, but because you've been trained to believe that thinking itself is a form of disloyalty. They weren't trying to destroy faith. They were trying to reclaim their minds. The men you've heard from weren't enemies of truth. They were its protectors. At least, that's what they believed. For years, they gave talks, held hands with grieving families, stayed up late preparing shepherding visits. They meant well. But one by one, they began to see cracks, not just in the doctrine, but in the way thinking itself was managed. They noticed the silence that followed questions, the smiles that faded when someone hesitated, the fear behind obedience. And when they finally stepped away, not in rebellion, but in conscience, they realized just how deeply the control had reached. Not through force, not through violence, but through structure, through language, through love, with limits. This isn't about attacking a religion. It's about understanding how influence works, quietly, persistently, and often in the name of God. Because when belief is sincere but unchecked, when devotion is rewarded, but questions are punished, even the kindest community can become a cage. And for those still inside, still wondering, still afraid to look beyond the next meeting or the next magazine, know this: the first step toward truth is never loud. It's quiet. It's internal. It's the moment you ask, what if the questions aren't wrong? And dare to listen for the answer.